So this is what they look like. It's actually a 10 millimeter shaft with a 12 millimeter sleeve on here. There's probably about that much thread still in there. These are adjusted to the size. These ship pretty cool though. See these cones? So you got to take the nut off. It protects the grease and the bushing from coming out. I hope that that shaft holds up, because this is a 10 millimeter shaft and the original one's a 12 millimeter. But this has a lot of preload on it, so there's a lot more tension, so I think it'll be all right. These shafts, I don't see them breaking. I always see the extension bracket, so I think it'll be all right. All right, so the other side's down, this side's up. We're gonna see how much droop we have. From the top of the tire to the top of the wheel well is 9 inches. So there's 9 inches before. And so here's the part we're going to be replacing. This is the OEM in-link, and then that's the extension bracket for the lift that snaps. They always snap right here. And then we're going to be replacing it with this Godspeed adjustable one. Let me get to focus. And we're going to set it so that it'll go into the original slot. Hopefully it'll clear everything. So we'll see. All right, so the bottom bolt is 17 millimeters and this top one is 19. You don't want to take the sway bar off the bracket, or the in-link off the bracket, because that's really hard to get to. So you want to put a combination wrench on the back, that's a 19, and then hit it with a 19 on the other side. And off she goes. The way that these compact, there's a sleeve that goes from 10 millimeter to 12, and then there's this cover for the boot to make sure that the grease doesn't come out. And you just want to check them always to make sure that they're greased up and everything's smooth. And now you're good to go put it back together. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side of it. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I want to make sure that the threads are relatively even on each side. You can kind of tell by looking at them, but I also want to look and make sure that there's enough thread within the center spline. So I'm going to do that just by kind of lining these up. And you can see we've got about 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch on each side, on top and on bottom, which is what you want. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to tighten these up on each side. And then we're going to go ahead and put the car down, and then we're going to adjust these and tighten the lock washer, or the lock nut. So sometimes what'll happen with these is you'll have to use the pass-through with the Allen key to keep it from turning, because that's what was happening when we were torquing it down. So it's a little difficult, but once you get it set, you're good. All right, now we're just gonna take off the passenger side and then lower it down and get adjusted. Remember, the bottom one's a 17 millimeter. Make sure it's on loosen so you don't strip it. Boom. I highly recommend using an impact for these because they tend to get seized and rusted and just a bunch of road debris on them. So an impact will make it much, much, much easier. As you can tell, this is the one I replaced not too long ago. That's why it's much cleaner than the other side. And then we're gonna do 19 millimeter on top on that bracket. Just like we did on the other side. And just like the other side, it's kind of stuck. So we're gonna move this out of the way. And even though the nut's off the other side completely, the threads are just kind of jammed in there. So we're gonna just go ahead and unscrew it like that. It's a tight fit, so. There we go. Now we got it out. So now we got it out, you can kind of see the difference. so see, before it was in the extension bracket, which put it up here, which based on the angle of the end link puts a lot of pressure, and I think that's why these things always snap. It's really important to make sure when you're tightening these on, that little cone sleeve that goes from 10 millimeter to 12 is seated in the right spot. Let's see if we can get to focus. You can see it in there, but you got to make sure that's in the right spot on both the upper and the lower. Didn't end up using the torque wrench on these because they're too small, so I'm just doing it really hand tight. But see, you gotta be careful because that center spline will spin sometimes, and then you gotta get an Allen wrench to stop it from spinning. So the new end links essentially go from here to here instead of up to here. So they go here to here in distance, and that should remove some of the leverage and the pressure from up here. If you're having a hard time getting these to stay tight, if you put the Allen wrench in and then kind of brace it on your tie rod, that'll work, and then that way it won't spin on you. It's a little hard to see from this angle. Let me look around. So hopefully you can see that, but kind of got anchored on the tie rod on the Allen wrench, and then you could do the same thing up here, and you can kind of anchor it on the top of the strut. Sorry, it's not focused. So you can kind of put the Allen wrench in here and kind of anchor it here, and then that way you don't have to worry about it spinning on you. But we're almost done. Then we're going to tighten everything up and go take it for a test ride. Now we've got both sides on. I'm going to put the wheels back on. We're going to put it down on the ground, and then I'm going to adjust it to try to remove any of the preload that's on them, and then tighten up those lock nuts, and we should be good, and then take it out for a little cruise. I have mixed feelings about how this will work out because they're shorter, so there's less leverage. They're back in the OEM slot, which is good, but they're thinner. The splines are thinner than the OEM ones, so I'm a little concerned about that, but I think they'll be okay. A lot of cars run 10 millimeter sway bar and link studs. 12 millimeters is actually kind of rare, so I think it'll be okay, especially if we remove the preload, so we'll see. All right, so you're gonna know you're in a pretty good spot if, sorry, it's hard to film here. When you go to turn this, it's pretty loose. Then you know you're in a good spot. So now I'm gonna just turn the wheels either way so I can tighten up these jam nuts. And we'll go take it for a test ride. But it's back on the ground, as you can see. And there's a good amount of play, which is actually good. That means there's no preload on them. What you're gonna have to be mindful of is when you're tightening this bottom jam nut, you don't want to over tighten it, because you want to pay attention to the bushing, the joint housing here. They should be at a 90 degree. If you over tighten this will start to turn. So you got to make sure that this is still at a 90 and this is at 90. If not, you're gonna put a lot of pressure on that ball joint right there. So make sure as you're turning this lock nut, this is not turning. It's at 90 still. Last thing I'm going to do after I've got everything installed is I just want to check for clearance. I just want to make sure, I know when it was up in the air, it wasn't rubbing on anything, it wasn't making contact. It's not, so that's good. Let's see if we can get to focus, sorry. So as you can tell, it's not making contact with anything. I also just want to check the angles of those ball joints. So I've got it at, full steer right now. I'll take it to the other side, show you the other side, and then we'll put the wheels straight just to make sure everything looks like it's at a healthy angle. Much more room on this side. All right, so same thing. We've got the wheel turn in the other direction. So we just want to check for contact points to make sure it's not hitting. The strut, the brake line mount, which it's not, which is good. We want to check the angles again of those ball joints. Just make sure nothing's at too extreme of an angle, and we look good. So what we're gonna do now is put the wheels straight, and we're gonna come back and just check those angles again, clearance, and then we'll go for a little test drive. All right, we're back under. So we got the wheels straight now, and again we're gonna check for clearance just to be safe, and then we're gonna check. Woo! Woo, that exhaust is hot. Woo. I just hit the exhaust manifold of my forearm. That is really warm. Woo. All right, so, man, I'm trying to hold the camera and not burn myself, so sorry it's shaking. But yeah, see, we want to check those angles, those ball joints. Perfect, they're at a 90, that's great. And sorry it's shaking so much, it's really hard to hold this without burning myself again. And we're clearing, so let's just go check the other side. Other note, while I fix that, pop those in. My arm got burnt pretty bad. I actually heard a sizzle. That was not fun.
So, we're checking the clearances here. Again, ooh, be careful this time. And we're good.
This is a little bit more of an angle than it should be though, so that should be a little bit closer to 90. I'm gonna go ahead and adjust that just a bit, but the top one looks good, clearance looks good. So this seems to be just maybe a little bit adjusted, this bottom one. So right now I'm just going for a little test drive. We're doing some slalom. This will just help that suspension settle, help get the everything seated nicely in place. We're gonna do some speed bumps. We're gonna do some pretty quick turning. Again, this is just to simulate some hard turns at high speed, just to shift that weight around on the sway bar. I hit some speed bumps. I'm gonna do some more swaying back and forth. I know it seems kind of crazy and boring, but you got to do this because you want to get all that pre-tension out of that system. And then we're going to go home, we're going to retighten everything, or make sure everything's tightened all over again, and we should be good. So in that speed bump, I will say, having removed the preload that used to be on the bracket extension, I will say that this is actually smoother. I've got a little bit less temp. This guy's driving no windshield. Oh my God. No windshield and a bunch of stuff out of the back. I don't know if you guys saw that. Woo. Anyways, because there's no more pre-tension on the system, it's a little bit softer of a ride. It's actually more similar to OEM. So if you watch my previous video, where the bracket broke, you'll notice that that bracket is shorter than 2 inches. So the front space lift is 2 inches. However, that bracket really put the extension more like a 1.5 inches, 1.25 inches. And so you actually had about a 1/2 inch of preload on the system at all times, which is nice because it made the car ride you know, stiffer. But the problem with that is it put a lot more pressure on that system there. So I had to go to Starbucks to get my wife something to drink, which gave me a perfect opportunity to do a little test drive. Also, make sure whenever you're doing a test drive, have your AC off, your radio off, everything off, your windows down. That way you can just hear if anything sounds loose. And then we'll go home and retighten it. Shift a little weight forward. Ooh, man, that BMW almost ran that light. This is such an exciting video. I burnt myself. We guys saw a guy driving without a windshield. This guy from California almost ran the light. Let's roll that up real quick because of the bus. And yeah, so it feels better. It's always hard to describe feel through a video, but it feels a little bit softer, a little bit more planted actually than it did, which is good. It actually feels more OEM than it did after I put the lift on. After I put the lift on, it was stiff. You know, at first I was like, hey, it's kind of stiff in a good way because the car was taller. It kind of helped offset some of the body roll. But what I quickly learned is on-road and off-road, it was just kind of uncomfortable because it was so stiff. I'm gonna take that turn harder than I normally would just to get some body lean in there. I'm gonna go ahead and go at this speed bump, going to, let's see, about 17. I'm gonna go at an angle just to get some cross pressure on that end link and the sway bar. All right, and kind of as expected, I've got a little bit of rattle now. But that's why I wanted to go take it on a little test drive, let everything loosen up, and then go back and try to tighten it. So hopefully, now that it's all settled and we go tighten it, it'll be good. It's got like just the tiniest bit of rattle though. Let's see if you can hear it. Yeah, it's not very loud, but I can hear just the tiniest bit of clanking. If I had to guess, it's one of those lock nuts. So just give it some more. Slalom. Yep. All right. So that's what we wanted to do though. We wanted to kind of see if anything was going to come loose. And let's go back to the house and see how it's going. It's not a lot of play. It's very little, but I could tell there's some play somewhere. I've also got stuff in the back that you probably hear banging around, but yeah, let's see. We'll go take a look. All right, so after a little test drive, this is what I was talking about. So look, other side's good, this is good. This bolt right here, that one's loose, see? So, and that caused just a little bit of give. So I'm gonna retighten this. We're gonna drive it some more today, and hopefully it stays tight, but the rest of them feel good. But that's why every time you do suspension parts, I've learned you wanna tighten it, go out, come back, check it, make sure everything's tight again, because literally this is finger loose. So the other side's good. Well, at least it's not hand loose. It might be loose, but I'm gonna go over all of them again with a wrench. We've got some errands to run today. That'll give us more of an opportunity to, you know, make sure everything's tight again, and then hopefully they stay tight. So now at full droop, we've actually got about 9 1/4 inch of clearance. So we actually did gain 1/4 inch of articulation. Grand, is that a ton? No. Is it something? Yes. And you can definitely feel it when you're driving. So again, it's not a huge difference. Sorry, I'm trying to get to focus, but you know, we gained 1/4 inch of articulation, which is a good thing if you saw my last comparison video. So hopefully these guys stay tight. Install's not too bad. I mean, honestly, you can get them on and adjusted in about an hour. Go out, test drive, come back, retighten. It's probably all in all an 1.5 to 2 hour job in all. I'm sure you can do it quicker if you're using better equipment, but with what I got, that's what happened. After driving around today, they're all good, except for this one keeps coming loose. That exact nut right there. So I'm gonna put some Loctite on all of them, and hopefully that does the trick, because the rest of them are good. It's literally just that one that is coming loose down there in the bottom. So a little trick I learned, I don't know if it's a trick per se, but what kept happening is when I was tightening the lock nut, it kept turning the bottom joint, and it wasn't at 90. So I think what's happening is when I was turning, it was putting too much pressure and it was just loosening the bolt. Now I've got it at perfect 90. Let me show you how I did that, because for whatever's in the driver's side, it's perfect. It's good. I put some Loctite on it, backed them out, put them back on, and they're at like basically a 90. But this side wasn't. Let me show you how I did that though. So I don't know how well you'll be able to see it on the camera, and if you can't, I apologize, but I'm gonna try to show you anyways. So instead of grabbing the shank and then tightening from the lock nut, because what I was doing is I was grabbing the shank and then tightening the lock nut, which maybe that's not the way you're supposed to do it. I've never installed these, so I'm learning. Instead what I did is I held it from the lock nut and I tightened it from the shank, and I got it super tight, and it's at a 90 now, perfect 90. So let me know in the comments, you know, maybe that was the way I was supposed to do it, and maybe that's why I was having so much trouble. But yeah, you want to grab it from the lock nut and turn the shank, and then that way it's at a nice 90 still, and then I'll go and do the top. But yeah, it's super tight now.
like, she texted and she's like, go to the parking lot.
Oh, I just know she crushed it that. All right, so far so good with the end links. The only thing that happened is this bolt right here came loose. I'm gonna tighten that. Man, they held up really well actually. The only thing is this top bolt came loose because I didn't have these at a 90. This side was offset. Tell me why. It took me like 30 minutes to finally get them at a good 90, and then I realized I had them at the wrong orientation. So I finally got them back at a good 90. And gonna Loctite everything up real good. I would still recommend them. This top bolt came a little bit loose, so it was clinking around on the way home, but the rest of them were good. But a few tips. So there's a sleeve that goes from 10 millimeter to 12. You wanna make sure you have that on the back side, not the front side going in. And then when you tighten these lock nuts, you want to make sure that these are at a perfect 90. The problem was these weren't at a 90, so when it was articulating, it kind of loosened up the spline because it pulled against it. And the other thing that I did right now is I took the spline all the way out and I Loctite within the spline and Loctite the lock nut. And I had to take them off, and it took me a while of adjustment to get these really tight, but also have these at a 90. So that takes a little bit of playing around with, but if you get these at a 90, I think they'll be just fine. My driver's side was good, and my driver's side wasn't even nearly as tight as this side was, but they're at a 90. So driver's side was perfect. This side is just this top one came a little bit loose, and again, it's because these weren't at a 90 degree.